Hello, my beautiful blossoms, blooms, and buds. Sorry I'm a little late today. I literally was finishing this, and then it started burning. So, I did the quickest of quick sketches. Can you guess which character I'm cosplaying this weekend along with my friend? It's definitely more of an interpretation. But yes. So hello, my beautiful blossoms, blooms, and buds. I'm Rosebud Reads, and welcome to my book garden. Actually, welcome to my basement / plushy garden / spooky garden. And hello, Chichi Kiki, and hello, Momar's Rover. Yeah, sorry I was a couple minutes late. I freaked out when this started burning. There's literally holes like right here and like right over here because this is a embroidery piece. So I was like, oh shit. Yeah. So hi Annika. Welcome. Oh, thank you. It originally was just gonna have the phoenix. And then it got burned, so now it's gonna be kind of more of a full picture. I am not super happy with how it looks, but it's kind of too late now. And I don't really want to do all this again. So I'm being lazy and it's going to be how it's going to be. But thank you. That gives me hope. I don't think anyone's going to be looking all that close at it anyway, because it's low key, but it is what it is. So it's how it's going to be. Thank you. Anyway, happy Harvest Moon Festival to all of you as well. I'm a bit scattered. I'm sorry. I think this is a little tilted too. There we go. But I have some exciting news. Oh, yes. This is the 6th live stream of the book 4 of the Disabled Tyrant's Beloved Pet Fish. And it's the second to the last live stream of Disabled Tyrant's Beloved Pet Fish ever from my channel. And yes, busy night. I did that. And I also ordered some supplies to make kind of more traditional candy, Kandi, for my convention this weekend. I'm going to see about putting some of those peppers on bracelets and all that. But I'm excited because I got a box of mooncakes. So I'm going to try these throughout the week, and I'll post and I'll tell you how they taste. But they look so pretty, so I wanted to show you guys. Oh, for you! Are you? What happened? What do you have going on, Truffle? So these are the mooncakes. They're so pretty. Look. I'm going to be bringing them, and my friend and I will share them this weekend when we're at the con. Yeah. I ended up just picking up the box on like Amazon, so I can do that. So pet talent show, anime stream. Now this, and might check out Love in the Clouds. You're right. That is a busy day. Did your pet win, or were you just going to see the pet talent show? And thank you. They are very cute. There's a guinea pig feeding with a guest. Oh, nice. Okay, you were just watching the show. Very nice. one other exciting thing that happened is one of my orders from AliExpress came in, and shocker, it's Wangxian. But I'm super excited because it's a slightly different style. He's got a little bit of fuzzies on his face, but they're still so cute. So it's kind of that new, kind of more warrior art, like the super fancy. Here, my face is in the way. There we go. Kind of more warrior one, the fancy one, like this. And then Lan Wangji is the one that's super extra. He's super extra in this one. He's got his fur coat. He does kind of look vampire-y. But they're super cute, and I'm excited that they came. So I'm gonna go put them up. I think since they are kind of vampire, they're gonna be in front of the O's. Nice. Okay. I like them a lot. The fur coats on those Chinese dramas are absolute peak. I agree. Let me see. Our recommendations, fic recs. Let me pull that up. Let me see. So today's fic recs, I picked The Life-Changing Conversation for Scum Villain, and it's by Random Fan by Bully. It's a short, relatively funny and lighthearted one-shot where the Peak Lords get a peek at the real relationship between Yu Qingyuan and Shen Qingchu. So the actual summary from the author is, Yu Qingyuan and Shen Qingchu have a private conversation. No longer remains private when the Snoopy Peak Lords decide to eavesdrop. They learn a lot, many shocking revelations that make them regret this decision. It's pretty funny. It's not very long. Right? I will be forever mad that we didn't get to see immortality. Yeah, agreed. For the MDZS fic recommendation, I picked Another Kind of Marriage, which is the first in a Ribbon Beats a Red String of Fate series. So it's a funny arranged marriage AU between Wangxian. It's kind of like an arranged marriage AU. You'll understand if/when you read it, because it happens due to Wei Wuxian's own unintentional doing. It's very lighthearted and well worth the read, like the whole series. So again, I highly recommend this and the other stories in the series. So the summary is, Wei Wuxian gets married to Lan Wangji a different way. Did you know if you pull a Lan sect member's ribbon off, you have to marry them? Everyone knows how strict the Lan sect is about rules. Everyone. Who has a virginity ribbon anyway? That is not all it stands for. It also represents self-restraint, honor, but I'm too young to get married. And that's the summary. So as you can tell, that one's pretty funny. Right? He's honestly more upset about being married than Hu too. He's like, I am too young. I can't just settle down. But yeah, I could also see it happening in canon, and Wei Wuxian probably would. There's the high possibility if he actually realized that it was because Lan Wangji had feelings for him and not because it was duty. Because I could see that being an issue. But yeah. So, I think that might be pretty much all I have that's new. Oh, I had a great weekend. I went to my pumpkin fest thing, got to carve a pumpkin. They put it on a gigantic pumpkin wall. They lit it all up. It was a lot of fun. Did anyone else do anything super fun this weekend that they want to talk about while I'm getting ready with the book stuff? I'm going to turn off my ringer real quickly. It's exactly why I'm going to turn off my ringer, for that exact reason. Okay. Move my keyboard back. Oh, yes. Our current yeet count is 3 for book 4, and our sub count going in is 13. Did your usual October thing of looking for weird horror movies. Has anyone heard of The Keep? It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure why. Was it good? Oh, like blockbuster overdue, or like I should have watched it sooner overdue? Because if you have a movie from Blockbuster, that's kind of like impressively overdue. All right. Should have watched it sooner. Movie from the library. Okay. Yeah. All right. Convinced a friend of mine who has never gone to a con to come with me to one. That's great, Mars Rover. Was this weekend the con for you, or is it coming up? I know someone else was going to a con soon. No, that's so fun when you can actually get someone to go with you. I remember when I kind of partially tricked my sister into coming to one by getting everyone else in her family excited to go to one. And she begrudgingly did it, and then we built a Mandalorian set. And then she was like, never again. So kind of shot myself in the foot with that one. But the rest of her family had a great time. She had a good enough time. And all that. Hey, maybe one day, Annika. Yeah, should have time to prepare. That's smart. You're right. Do you have any ideas on what you might be doing? Like, are you going to try to do something that's like paired or in the same universe? Or just your own thing? Both options are great. I just know sometimes it's really fun to do like matching or group costume. That's it. That's the word. Group costumes. I'm excited. The Jinchi one, my friend is doing Mao Mao. So that's kind of what that. Oh my goodness. I haven't heard about Soul Eater in so long, but oh, Maka and Krona. That's a good combo. That's a fun combo too. Which one are you going to be? Just out of curiosity. Remember, I used to love that show. Nice. I love Krona. Poor Krona. They went through some shit. I mean, to be fair, everybody in that show goes through some shit. No, but that'll be so much fun. Okay. So I'm actually going to go ahead and get started. What time is it? I just got here into anime and it's her favorite. So just got her into anime and it's her favorite so far. I feel that it's a good one to kind of start it off. It's a pretty solid series. All right. So we ended last time. It's about 15 right now. So I'll put 15. I'll have to get a new post-it next time. We filled it up. Li Yu had been dressed as the wet nurse to kind of trick Chu Yanyu in their plot because they were trying to expose Li Yu as a fish Yao, and they didn't know. I think Liu confirmed with the system that it wouldn't have worked anyway, but kind of to catch Liu or Chu Yanyu in his plot, expose all that, he dressed as a wet nurse and was there with Prince Jing when Chu Yanyu was telling all of this to the emperor and everyone else. So I felt bad sometimes for Chu Yanyu, and I hated that. I mean, they were manipulative, but it's also kind of a harem intrigue book in the background. I mean, Liu and Prince Jing kind of make that not as apparent, but it was a lot of harem intrigues were very down and out dirty fights, so it kind of was a product of being in the harem. But I know what you mean, Truffle. They did catch themselves, as one of the phrases, they caught themselves in their own pitchfork, but they kind of almost had to if they wanted to survive at that point. Yeah, I know what you mean. So, Prince Jing was a little too into hoist on their own petard. Prince Jing was a little too into the idea of Liu being able to lactate, and so he keeps calling him wet nurse. So he'd given birth to the children and he'd fed them. Of course he was a wet nurse. And then there was nothing after that. Wet nurse Liu was sucked dry by the father of his children. In the first half of the night, they were fighting and pounding. In the latter half, all that was left were sweet noises. The couple were still in the middle of a private, passionate exchange when someone knocked desperately on the door. Usually, whenever they did such deeds, they would lock the door. Pretty smart. Liu hurriedly wrapped the blanket around himself and glared at the crown prince, but his messy hair, teary eyes, and swollen lips didn't hold much threat. The crown prince's mood soared. He smiled at him indulgently, then went to open the door. A fish baby stood outside, holding a small pillow. "Dad," Da Bao said timidly, "I want to sleep with the wet nurse." The children slept on their own now, so that they wouldn't come bother their fish dad. But Da Bao still wanted to sleep with his fish dad. He'd finally found an excuse. Mu Tianxi stared down at Da Bao. How could Liu say no to his son? He immediately had his husband bring his son in. Da Bao was very happy to be next to his fish dad. Hugging his little pillow, he willingly went to sleep between his two dads. Be good, Da Bao. Be quiet. Da Bao closed his eyes blissfully. Liu threw a comforting glance at his husband. The couple lay down around their son. Soon after, there was another knock on the door. In that fashion, the door was knocked on 4 separate times. In total, there were 3 fish babies who wanted to sleep with the wet nurse, and 1 who wanted to sleep with Crown Prince Daddy. I think that might have been Sibao. What were they going to do? The wet nurse was dumbfounded. Only this once. The crown prince swiped at Liu's nose affectionately and laid down with him, holding their babies. Everyone was finally satisfied. Baby pile! That's such a cute picture, and they totally robbed us by not showing it. I'm safe from any further essence absorbing, right? Liu thought carefully. After a night of peace, the children left for the imperial study room the next morning. The crown prince went to the Ministry of Rites. When he returned, he smiled at Liu. Wet nurse. Wet Nurse Liu's face went bright red, his brows ascending into his hair. Asshole, is there any end to this? And that's where we left off last time. So it was kind of a lighthearted, super, well, family-focused way to look at it. Okay. Quick sip, then we'll start. All right. Chapter 144. Fishy in the kitchen. Uh-oh. The Crown Prince had dealt with Chu Yanyu and Wang Shi, and Xiao Luo had given Piakshu several baths. Its fur had been dried several times now, and it was so white it glowed. There wasn't a single dirty hair on its body, and no more unpleasant smells. The Crown Prince had asked the servants who were in charge of royal pets to check on it multiple times. Even after they assured him the cat was fine now, the Crown Prince still wouldn't let Liu approach Piakshu. All because Chu Yanyu had once put black dog's blood on it. Although Liu had explained many times that he was not afraid of any priest or any blood, the Crown Prince was still worried something would happen to him. It was very hard to convince a stubborn person, and Liu knew he was just trying to look out for him. If it had been something else rather than black dog's blood, the Crown Prince might still not have let him touch it. Oh, Liu had an idea. Then can you hold it for me? He said. Couples were one. If his husband held it, didn't that basically mean he held it too? Oh, hello, Esper lady. Welcome. We literally just started, like the same page. Basically, they gave Piakshu a number of baths, checked on him, he's doing okay, and Prince Jing still isn't letting Liu hold the cat, because he's like, it got touched by dog's blood, something might happen. The Crown Prince hesitated for a moment. He'd already said no many times and knew that this was Xiao Yu compromising. For his safety, as well as his happiness, he couldn't say no to this request. He agreed. Wang Shi stood to the side, a smile blooming on his face, and handed the fluffy white Piakshu over to the Crown Prince. After several rounds of torment, Piakshu had long since given up any resistance. If it had dried fish, it would eat. If not, it would just lay there. Now it was suddenly being picked up. It found itself being pushed to a large, tall man. Meow! Piakshu recognized this man. All its fur immediately stood on end, and it started yowling. The Crown Prince didn't like Piakshu either. He picked the cat up stiffly. Piakshu opened its mouth, about to bite, but the Crown Prince glared daggers at it, and it immediately shrank back. With the fear the Crown Prince had instilled lodged deep in its heart, it stayed completely still, afraid to move, and just let the stiff, plier-like hands hold it. The Crown Prince glanced at Wang Shi. Wang Shi's smile kept twitching as he brought over a dried fish with shaking hands. The Crown Prince put the dried fish near Piakshu's mouth, and Piakshu didn't dare resist. It took a few fearful bites. For the first time, the cat thought the dried fish was tasteless. I fed it, said the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince and the cat both hated each other. With his task complete, he immediately set the cat down. Piakshu picked up the dried fish and ran to hide behind Wang Gongong. Sitting in his chair, Li Yu was so amused that he couldn't even speak. The Crown Prince went to bathe and change before coming back out to hug this fish who was in constant danger of suffocating from laughing too much. What was the point of holding a cat? He liked holding a fish much more. Because of Chu Yanyu, Piakshu stayed at the Crown Prince's manor for a few days, enjoying a life of luxury. It had no interest in playing with the rabbits or chasing the ducks. It just lay on the wall, sleeping and enjoying the sun. In the end, though, it still didn't belong in the Crown Prince's manor. A few days later, Piakshu disappeared again. It must have gone to find its owner, Liu thought. Piakshu hadn't known the way before, but it should now. Liu asked Wang Shi to go to the cold palace to check up on Piakshu. When Wang Shi came back, he reported Piakshu was back by Lady Chu's side. It was strange. When Piakshu was at the Crown Prince's manor, it seemed listless, but in the cold palace it ran around everywhere, catching butterflies and mice, as lively as could be. Even if Lady Chu yelled at it when she was in a bad mood, it wouldn't leave. Lady Chu didn't have dried fish, so she could only feed Piakshu her leftovers. But Piakshu ate it up just the same. Every time Wang Shi went to the cold palace, he'd bring dried fish for Piakshu. This time was no different. When Lady Chu found out Wang Shi had come to feed her cat, she exchanged a few words with him. Wang Shi told her that Chu Yanyu had tried to use Piakshu to harm the Crown Prince consort, but that the consort didn't blame the cat. Wang Shi originally hoped Lady Chu would be thankful, but instead her expression grew dark. "I lead an inauspicious existence," she said coldly. "The Crown Prince consort's kindness is too much for me." What she meant was that she didn't want Wang Gongong to come back. After all, the Marquise of An and the Crown Prince were enemies. There was no way to fix that relationship. Lady Chu hated the Crown Prince. The reason Xu Yanyu had used Piakshu for his scheme was because he'd noticed the Crown Prince Manor had started taking care of Piakshu. Now she knew what had happened. Lady Chu no longer wanted anything to do with the Crown Prince Manor. Wang Shi relayed Lady Chu's message, and Liu fell silent. He remembered that when Lady Chu had been secretly brought to the manor, she'd asked them to take care of Piakshu. When Wang Shi first started feeding the cat, Lady Chu hadn't stopped him. Why had she changed her tune now? Well, because something actually happened to her cat, and she's like, the next time my cat might be, gone. Perhaps after Piakshu disappeared, Lady Chu realized they were still enemies. Well, never mind. Liu had just wanted to thank Piakshu. It was fine if the Crown Prince held the cat for him, but everyone had to make a choice. If this impacted the Crown Prince or made things harder for him, then he could do without it. "This is good too," Liu said to Wang Shi. "Piakshu's already gone back." Wang Shi let out a sigh of relief. He was afraid Liu would be unhappy. In order to lift his master's mood, Wang Shi recounted something else he saw. "This time, this old servant saw someone else at the cold palace," he said with a chuckle. "Who?" asked Liu. "Noble I mean, he doesn't have any titles anymore. He's just a commoner. I saw him there." "Chu Yanyu?" Liu had almost forgotten about him. After Chu Yanyu was beaten and sent to the cold palace, he hadn't asked after him at all. Wang Shi saw that Liu wasn't about to stop him, so he continued. "I almost couldn't recognize him. But that's no surprise when he's been living somewhere like the cold palace." In order to survive in the palace, one needed connections, especially in a place like the cold palace, where there was no hope of leaving. For example, Lady Chu at least had the Marquise of An outside the palace. Although the Marquise of An was no longer in the running for the throne, and there wasn't much he could do, as long as he was still alive, it was better than nothing. That's harsh but true, I guess. For those who truly had no support and had been rejected by the emperor for something they did, all that was left for them was a life of suffering at the hands of the servants. Those who had money could live a little better, but only a little. Those who didn't have money just had to suffer through it. When Chu Yanyu first arrived at the cold palace, he'd taken a few valuable things with him. But because he'd just been beaten and couldn't move, he had to watch as most of his possessions were taken and split between the servants. These servants were like starving wolves. When they spotted so much as a bangle, they'd smash it off his wrist and take it. Chu Yanyu couldn't stop them, and he still had to pay for doctors and medicines. After being scammed by a few strangers, he didn't have much left. There was a servant at the cold palace who knew a little about medicine. He casually checked his pulse, took away the last of his money, and gave him a few common ointments. The ointments preserved his life, but couldn't save his legs. Because he hadn't been treated on time, his legs never healed properly. Now he walked with a limp, and the injuries from his beating never fully went away. But at least he survived. These days, Chuyanyu lived in a house with a half-caved-in roof. Every morning he got up. The only thing he could do was stare at the sky above him with empty eyes. So going back to what you said, Truffle, I do feel a little bad for Chuyanyu because this is awful. Like, I've been there with the leg pain too. Like, I mean, I didn't have someone beat me up. It was my own stupidity. But, like, that totally affects your quality of life. And, I mean, that's a hard way to live, no matter who you are. If only he hadn't tried to expose the Crown Prince. If only he hadn't angered the Crown Prince. If only he hadn't entered the palace to be the Emperor's concubine. If only he'd stuck with the Crown Prince from the very beginning. If only he'd never met the Sixth Prince. Of course, it was impossible to go back in time, but imagining these possibilities became Chuyanyu's only solace. Just 2 meals were provided at the Cold Palace, and the head of the Cold Palace was in charge of them. Those who had money and outside support would obviously get better food, but Chuyanyu had spent all his money on his injuries. He didn't even have a piece of fabric on him that could be worth anything. As it was clear that he didn't have anything, he was only given cold leftovers. Eating it was like chewing on candles, but he had to eat it. If he didn't, he'd starve. After eating one meal, then another, he could go back to sleep. On this day, he'd only had 1 meal when someone came looking for him. Chuyanyu was confused as to why anyone would think of him. He hadn't seen a single one of his servants since he entered the Cold Palace. Hong Er probably didn't meet a good end, but as for the rest, he'd fallen so low, so why worry about anyone else? Although he didn't know who it was, if someone could remember him at a time like this, they might be able to help him. Chuyanyu adjusted his unrefined robes and walked out. But what greeted him was a slap to the face that nearly made him fall over. "Bitch! How dare you harm my cat!" Lady Chu's eyebrows were nearly vertical as she cursed him out. Chuyanyu's head was buzzing like a swarm of bees had flown by. Slowly, sounds started to get quieter and quieter. He could see Lady Chu's lips moving, but he couldn't hear what she was saying. To the side, a pure white cat sat on the floor, boredly licking its paws. Lady Chu said something, took a bottle out from her sleeve, and poured it on Chuyanyu. "Master, the servant is done." Wangxi finished telling Liu the gossip from the Cold Palace. "Wang Gong, are you saying Lady Chu beat up Chuyanyu?" Liu was a little confused. How did Lady Chu find Chuyanyu? Were the antagonists fighting each other? Either way, the Imperial consort sure was formidable. Chuyanyu was completely weakened right now. He probably couldn't win in a fight against her. Privately, Liu hoped the Imperial consort would teach noble Lady Chu a lesson. It was too gross to pour dog's blood on a cat. "Master, not only did Lady Chu beat him up, she even gave Chuyanyu a small gift." Wangxi smiled mysteriously. "It wasn't drugs or anything like that, of course. It was a bottle of dog's blood. What went around came around. If Chuyanyu could get his hands on dog's blood, why couldn't Lady Chu?" Chuyanyu's beatings had come from the Emperor and the Crown Prince. The dog's blood was from Lady Chu. They were completely different. After Chuyanyu was splashed with the stinking liquid, even the other denizens who rarely bathed would avoid him. There were no bathing facilities in the Cold Palace. Chuyanyu felt he might go insane. He could only get water from the well to clean himself with, but even after many attempts, the odor remained. This old servant heard that everyone in the cold palace calls him walking dog's blood, Wang Shi said. Liu wanted to laugh, but thought that might be rude, so he only coughed a few times. He and Xu Yanyu really could have just left each other alone, but he had to provoke Liu. What goes around comes around. Anyway, there was no need to feel like he'd stolen the crown prince away. Back when he was a fish, he'd noticed that the crown prince was not interested in Xu Yanyu. The prince liked him, and he liked the crown prince. He wouldn't betray the crown prince, so Xu Yanyu should have just stayed where he belonged. Liu asked Wang Shi not to give him any more updates on Xu Yanyu. There were only so many hours in the day. He'd prefer to spend time with his husband and sons than waste it on irrelevant people. His husband, the crown prince, was slowly adjusting to his work at the Ministry of Rights, and it wasn't keeping him as busy as before. But perhaps because the emperor saw how much free time the crown prince had now, he gave him another job at the Ministry of Revenue. He always seemed to be busy with something these days, but whenever he did have a moment, he'd always come back to spend time with Liu. As for the children, they constantly traveled between the imperial study room and the crown prince's manor. Recently, they even started learning how to use chopsticks. Liu was bored during his pregnancy and wanted to find something to do that was safe and interesting. Wong Gong Gong, how about I start cooking for the children and the crown prince? The children had to go to the imperial study room every day. To combine studying and using chopsticks, Liu came up with the idea of making heart bento for the children. After all, he'd cooked for the crown prince before. Easy peasy. Liu rubbed his hands together, prepared to give the children and their dad a surprise. The children didn't like cucumbers, but he didn't think being picky eaters was a good habit. Maybe he'd make those smashed cucumbers that their dad couldn't stop praising. Wang Shi was horrified. He had once had the honor of tasting the crown prince consort's cooking. The taste was really indescribable. The crown prince had ordered the entire manor to not say anything about it, so the consort never found out how bad his cooking was. A long time had passed since then. Wang Shi had assumed that with the consort's status and the fact that he was pregnant, it wouldn't occur to him to do something like that again. But not only did it occur to him, he intended to start immediately. The crown prince consort wanted to cook for the crown prince and the young masters. Who could stop him? He had to let the crown prince know immediately. Yeah, I agree. Wang Shi. Oh, no. Poor Wang Shi. Yep. It's like, uh-oh. My poor young masters. Chapter 145. Fishy Kicking. Liu got started right away, since it wasn't like he needed any extra prep. He rolled up his sleeves and got right to it. It was just smashed cucumber. He wouldn't be dealing with oil and smoke, so his daughter wouldn't be affected. He was already in his second trimester, and he was even sleepier than when he first got pregnant. Currently, he felt like he was as big as a cow. Forget cucumber, he thought he could smash an elephant without any problems. Anyone else think that Prince Jing is a bit too used to poison? Yeah, probably. Smashing cucumber required physical labor, and Auntie Xue didn't want her pregnant master to do any work. She was about to take over, but Liu had already picked up the knife and was smacking it down onto the cucumber. In a few smooth motions, the cucumber was already in pieces. Auntie Xue had no choice but to assist. Bro does not need more. Yup. Huh? What's this? Liu found a small, unassuming jar on the corner of the stove. It looked kind of like a sugar or salt canister. Auntie Xue took it and glanced at it before smiling. Master, this is pepper from the south. Barely any is produced in a year, and it's worth more than its weight in gold. Liu thought he'd heard wrong. Wasn't this just pepper? In his world, pepper was practically worthless, but he knew in ancient times spices and seasonings were expensive. Perhaps pepper was more expensive than gold. I mean, at least it means he's unaffected by Liu's cooking, right? Love conquers all, right? And the pepper that was more expensive than gold was just thrown into a little jar. Wasn't that pretty careless? The Crown Prince really was teaching him time and time again what it meant to be rich. And what did ancient pepper taste like? Liu, there were whole dang wars fought over spices. That's so true. There really were. Liu sniffed the jar curiously. The taste truly hadn't changed over the last 1,000 years. As he was sniffing, though, he accidentally spilled quite a lot of the pepper on the cucumber. This pepper was more expensive than gold. He couldn't let the pepper fight this battle alone, so he decided to add a few other seasonings as well. Oh. My first thought was if you over-seasoned it, you either have to add more or change the recipe. And I mean, change it to some other kind of food. But no, we're going to keep it spiced. You, at that point, add more cucumbers, because, oh boy. Over in the Ministry of Rites, when Mu Tianxi received Wang Gongong's urgent message, a tinge of warmth bloomed on his previous expressionless face. Your Highness, did you just receive some good news? An official from the Ministry of Rites asked bravely. The normally cold Crown Prince had never seemed so approachable. The Crown Prince nodded. Xiao Yu cooking for him was indeed a good thing. But if he was also cooking for the children... The Crown Prince paused. He had to figure out a way to stop him. He summoned his guards and gave them some instructions, and they left in a hurry. After a while, they returned with 2 food boxes. The Crown Prince had sent the guards back to the manor and found a way to bring all the lunches here. Since Xiao Yu wanted the lunch to be a surprise, he couldn't let Xiao Yu know that he'd already found out. Through their own methods, and with the help of Wang Gongong, the guards had managed to get their hands on Liu's 2 heart bentos. The consort had specified that the red one was for the children and the green one was for the Crown Prince. At least Prince Jing is realistic about Liu's cooking. Yeah. Under the Crown Prince's orders, they first brought both boxes to the Ministry of Rites. Mu Tianxi accepted both boxes, then looked inside. Then he brought out another lunchbox that looked exactly the same, filled it with snacks that the children loved, and ordered the guards to take it to the Imperial Study Room. The children were so small. Instead of teaching them how to tell a kind lie without letting anything slip, he might as well just take care of it for them. To the Crown Prince, this was nothing at all. He didn't like other people eating the consort's cooking anyway, even if it was the children. He'd get jealous. That's kind of a little cute to me, and I don't know quite what that says about me as a person, but I think that's a little sweet. I know that there's potentially some red flag aspects about that, but I mean, hogging both of the lunches for himself, the Crown Prince sat down happily and started eating from the green box. Each of the officials at the Ministry of Rites were cleverer than the next. When they heard the Crown Prince consort had sent lunch, they were all envious, as expected of those who worked at the Ministry of Rites. They even had their own way of complimenting the Crown Prince on his loving relationship. Prince Jing, poisoning me is fine, but the kids should be left out of it. I think there's also just more of a... He can only, cook for me, sort of. This was my thing first. The The kids can have their favorites, but your dad can only cook for me. Like, sorry, not sorry. Yeah, he's jealous of even his babies. They even but when they smelled the unusual scent of the cucumbers on the Crown Prince's plate, they gagged. What were they supposed to say? This time, not only did the cucumbers have pepper on them, there was also a lot of star anise and fennel. But under the official's fearful watch, the Crown Prince ate every last bite without so much as a change of expression. After all of the Crown Prince's consort's hard work, when the Crown Prince and children returned to the manor, they all let him know that lunch was delicious. The children wouldn't lie. Was the Crown Prince's lunch also delicious? Liu felt a little unsure for some reason, but the Crown Prince kept smiling. Whenever he looked at him, the gentleness in his eyes was undeniable. Liu suddenly came to a realization. The Crown Prince must love pepper. He'd have to remember that. He loves something, but I don't think it's pepper. Right, I can't even imagine how that tasted. Those are super strong spices. And he was generous with them. He was probably equally as generous with the pepper that even he realized was too much pepper. So it was even more than too much pepper. The Crown Prince was shy and often conveyed his affections through his gaze. The children, however, were different. Dad, tastes good! Airbao yelled loudly and made a wish. I want it tomorrow, too. No problem. Liu hurried to say yes. If his husband and children liked it, then that was all the validation he needed. Even though he didn't have the luck of a koi fish in the kitchen, he could learn. Tianxi, how about I cook for you every day, too? Liu wasn't the kind of man who forgot about his husband once he had kids. He liked to take care of them all at the same time. See, he matches his freak, and I love it. The Crown Prince hesitated. Then he smiled and said, Okay. Liu was about to shamelessly praise himself when he felt a distinct movement in his stomach. After freezing for a moment, he realized what it was, and he was so overjoyed his tone completely changed. Tianxi, come quick! She kicked! Ever since he'd gotten pregnant with their daughter, Liu had been anticipating feeling her moving for a while now. But he wasn't sure what it felt like when a baby moved in the womb. Sometimes it felt like something was blowing bubbles inside of him, like he was pregnant with a fish. But that was something only he could feel. The Crown Prince couldn't experience it with him. Prince Jing's tongue is gonna fall off if he gets a lunch like that every day. Yeah, I mean, that or he'll just lose some taste buds, but same sentiment. This was different. It was like someone had forcefully shoved at him from the inside. A vague bump protruded out from his stomach. Liu was 100% sure that this was his daughter moving. He was afraid that if he moved, she would stop moving, so he didn't even dare blink. He just kept calling out to the Crown Prince. Mu Tianxi ran over and held him, lightly hugging his stomach. Encouraged, Liu held his hand and placed it on his stomach. But they waited a while and nothing happened. Not this time? Liu jokingly apologized to him and moved the Crown Prince's hand away. Just in time for her to kick again. Liu hurriedly put the Crown Prince's hand back on his stomach, but their daughter had already stopped moving again. Liu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was she making fun of her father? As if she could feel her fish dad's emotions, when Liu put the Crown Prince's hand back on his stomach again, she didn't disappoint. She kept moving around this time. She's really moving. Very quickly, the Crown Prince could feel the force beneath his palm and stared incredulously at Liu's stomach. That's our daughter! Liu nodded delightedly, extremely proud of her. Dad! Dad! Dabao, Airbao, Sanbao, and Seabao all gathered around. The children didn't quite know how to express themselves. They just kept hugging Liu's stomach. Moving! She's moving! Liu didn't dodge the topic. He told them there was a sister in his stomach. The children all corrected themselves. Mei Mei is moving! Watching on from a distance, Wang Shi couldn't help but wipe away his tears. Although he wasn't sure why his masters were this emotional over the consort's second pregnancy, he himself was overwhelmed with emotions too. So perhaps it made sense. He didn't know that despite already having 4 kids, this was Liu's first time being pregnant as a human. Naturally, it was all very new. And we actually have a picture of this cute scene. I love how Seabao's like in the back, kind of just like peeking up like, Mei Mei! Probably sneaking a hand under Liu's arm. Right? Even the emperor was paying special attention to this pregnancy. Ever since he found out, he'd sent an imperial physician to the crown prince's manor to take the consort's pulse every day. The next day, when the crown prince went to court, there was a blissful smile on his lips. His daughter had moved. The emperor was a little surprised. The crown prince hadn't even been like this on the day he'd been conferred the title. My daughter moved, the crown prince explained when the emperor asked him about it. I'm very happy. When he found out, the emperor felt a little forlorn. The first 4 babies had been born at the faraway western border, and the emperor hadn't been able to look after them. By the time he'd finally got to hold them, they were already nearly a year old. With this 5th child, the emperor mused, he had to do something special. But none of the imperial physicians were sure whether this child would be male or female. How was the crown prince so sure? The emperor figured, since they had already had 4 sons, they must really want a daughter. He heard the crown prince consort had already decided on a baby's name. Xiao Mian Ao. Xiao Mian Ao. Xiao Mian Ao. Thinking of Da Bao and the others, the emperor thought it would be great to have a granddaughter too. When the crown prince returned to the manor that day, he brought a bunch of gifts from the emperor. The emperor had said he was only giving a few gifts, but he gave practically enough for all 4 children. Normally, one ought to consider everything carefully when receiving rewards from the emperor. Since he got pregnant, though, Liu always seemed to be a beat behind. He tried not to use his brain if he didn't have to. Only when you're pregnant, Liu? Let's be real. Now that he was getting further and further along, it was harder for him to move around. When he first got pregnant, he thought he'd have 10 months to slowly prepare himself. But recently he started feeling anxious about the birth. The Princess of Jinju often came to see him, and she couldn't quite understand what he was worried about. In her eyes, after all, Liu was a miracle worker who'd managed to give birth to quadruplets. She had no idea this was his first time. Still, at Liu's request, she recounted some of her experiences. The more Liu heard, the more afraid he got, and he grew to be even more anxious. After becoming pregnant, he'd always slept well, but now his fear had been giving him insomnia. For the first time that night, he flipped over with great difficulty, and the crown prince, or for the second time that night, he flipped over with great difficulty, and the crown prince woke up. Xiao Yu? The prince rubbed Liu's head. Liu had his back to him. He was awake, but he didn't move at all. Mu Tianxi carefully flipped the fish back over and found his face was covered in snot and tears. Technically, sob. Like, Not comedy sob, 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 but real life, oh my gosh, sob, sob, sob. So technically counting it. They do be tears. That's right, Annika. Mu Tianxi immediately hugged him, worried. What is it? Liu buried his face in his chest. I'm scared, suddenly. He froze as though he'd reached breaking point and then started to sob out loud. Oh, it'll be okay, right, Truffle? It wasn't that he didn't want this child. He'd truly grown to love Xiao Mian Ao. When she first started moving, he'd been the happiest one there. But his fear was real too. He was about to face an unfamiliar peril he had to experience all by himself, and he was afraid. His tears had nothing to do with whether or not he was strong. He had to let his emotions out in order to conquer his fear. Liu kept on encouraging himself. He could do it. He wanted to push away the prince and tell him not to worry. People were more sensitive during pregnancy. He'd been easy to anger before, so perhaps he was just as easy to cry now. Was he trying to run away at the last minute? This was a little dramatic. Even he was judging himself. I'm fine. I'm just a little emotional, Liu sobbed. But the crown prince didn't leave just because he told him to. He continued to hold him, gently patting him on the back. Xiao Yu, if you want to cry, just let it out, he soothed him quietly. Don't force yourself. Liu had already calmed down quite a lot, but with these words, he started crying again. The crown prince couldn't do anything to help. Liu knew he hated how helpless he was in this circumstance. Pregnancy really was difficult, both physically and mentally. Liu wanted to complain. It was clearly their shared child, so why was he the only one suffering? He pouted, still unhappy. The Crown Prince lifted his sleeve and exposed his arm. If you're unhappy, he said in a low voice, just bite me. Liu looked for a fleshy spot, and then he really did bite down savagely without letting go. The Crown Prince didn't even furrow his brows. After Liu was done, he held him tightly. Unfortunately, that pain is nothing compared to yours, he said, his heart aching. Don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Liu, who had already cried far too much, felt his eyes turning red again. But hearing that from the Crown Prince and taking a bite out of him really did make him feel better. I'm okay now. Don't worry, he said hoarsely. Sometimes his fear felt like it filled him up entirely. But as long as he could remember how much he was loved, even his greatest fear could be chased away. I love these two so much. They have such a healthy relationship. Like, damn. Oh my goodness. Like, so envious, but like, like, this is such a good relationship. Like, it's not just like everything is fine. It's like I have feelings and they're hard. Right? The cute aggression over these two is real. Oh my gosh, yes. They're setting the bar impossibly high. They so are. Like, they beat the would you love me if I was a worm test in book 1. Would you love me if I was an ugly koi? Yes. The answer is yes. Ugh. Chapter 146. Fishy Birth of a Daughter. Oh, we actually get the birth of a daughter in this chapter. Nice. Although the emperor had already announced Mu Tianxi as the crown prince, the ceremony hadn't been held yet. The Ministry of Rites was in charge of the ceremony. In order to satisfy the emperor and the crown prince, the Ministry of Rites and the Imperial Astrological Bureau had pointed out a few auspicious dates for the emperor to choose from. Now that the emperor had discovered what it felt like to make the crown prince do the hard work, he gave the crown prince more and more responsibilities. As such, he also asked the crown prince for his thoughts on the ceremony. To his surprise, the crown prince picked the latest date, half a year from now. Although Prince Jing's manor was now the Crown Prince Manor, and everyone referred to it as such, there was still one remaining step. The ceremony was the last part of the procedure and couldn't be avoided. The Emperor hadn't expected the Crown Prince to be so patient, but then he remembered the Crown Prince consort was due in a couple of months and felt like he understood. All of these dates were suggested by the Ministry of Rights anyway, so it was fine. With more time, they would be able to make better preparations. If the Crown Prince wanted that date, there was no reason for the Emperor to deny him, so he readily agreed. Liu secretly let out a sigh of relief when he found out the Crown Prince's ceremony would be held after he gave birth. His belly was growing heavier and heavier, but as the Crown Prince's consort, he had to attend the Crown Prince's ceremony. Apparently, the ceremony involved making sacrifices to the heavens. There was no way it would take less than a day. It would be very hard for him to make it through the entire thing. In preparation, Liu had steeled himself and asked Wang Shi to help make him many soft cushions, just in case. He was thrilled to learn that he wouldn't have to use them after all. The Crown Prince wasn't the type to ask for thanks. As long as Liu was happy, so was he. But when Wang Shi found out what he was hiding, he really wanted to tell the consort. If the Crown Prince wasn't going to say anything, Wang Gonggong would reveal it to the consort secretly. The date that he picked wasn't originally in the Ministry of Rights consideration. Since they were afraid the prince wouldn't want to wait so long, the Crown Prince, who had been working at the Ministry of Rights for a while now, went to the minister to add the date, and he was the one who convinced the emperor to choose this date. When Wang Shi revealed the truth, Liu's delight turned into gratitude. The crown prince had to go through this ceremony to truly become the crown prince, so it was obvious how important it was for him. Liu was determined to go through with it no matter what. But the crown prince was willing to delay such an important ceremony for him, just so that he could feel more comfortable. Even though the crown prince couldn't share the pain of childbirth, he had still done a lot for him. In turn, Liu was willing to be a little braver for the crown prince's sake. If the birthing process was truly painful, he'd just take a few more bites after the fact to get back at him. Prince Jing's gonna be having a lot of bite marks at him, if that's his choice right there. The due date slowly approached, and Liu wasn't so scared anymore. His stomach grew larger and larger, which meant Xiao Mian Ao was growing larger and larger too. I think I actually said it right that time on the first try. I'm proud of myself. Halfway through the 9th month, Liu's stomach was so large he couldn't see his feet. It was just like a ball. Before, Liu had still been able to cook his heart bento, but he didn't dare cook anymore. Even if he had dared, the crown prince wouldn't let him, so that was the end of the bentos. With his stomach so heavy, not only was his movement restricted, he couldn't sleep well either. It was all right during the night, but it was really difficult to take his afternoon naps now. When the crown prince found out, he would attend court every morning, then rush back home to eat lunch and take a nap with Liu. He'd leave again once Liu fell asleep. Liu felt a little more comfortable when he could snuggle with him. He needs, what is that called, a boppy? The, U-shaped baby pillow thing? He needs to make a boppy in ancient China. Although, I don't know if he's been around, any, modern-day pregnant women, so he wouldn't know about the boppy. My sister had 2 of them because she liked it so much. Xiao Luo was the kind of person who couldn't sit still. always wanting to help out her masters. "It's not sustainable for His Highness to keep running back and forth like this," she said privately to Madame Qin. "Let's make a big cushion for the mess." They're making a boppy in ancient times! Nice! Madame Qin smiled. "Do you think the Crown Prince hasn't thought of this? His Highness practically wanted to dote on the master even more, so how could he find it tiring?" Xiao Luo was a young lady, so she had only barely understood what Madame Qin meant. In the same meaningful tone, Wang Shi had spoken to her before. She said to Xiao Luo, "You'll understand in the future." I called it! He's making him a boppy. I got the person wrong. Xiao Luo nodded, red-faced. Time flew by. One day, Liu woke up to a sore back, but he hadn't yet reached the 10th month mark, so he didn't pay it much mind. So, a little note. In China, pregnancy is culturally considered to last 10 months in the same way the normal length is thought of as 9 months in the West. You'll see that sometimes if you're reading other novels like this where they'll mention they have 10-month pregnancies. It's kind of an interesting fact. Kind of like how some birthday, I can't remember what culture, but your first birthday isn't counted sometimes. I think there's a culture where it does that. I can't remember which one. So anyway, after breakfast, he usually took a walk in the yard. Wang Shi cleaned the yard personally every day so that there wasn't even a single speck of dust. With the help of Xiao Luo and a few other servants, Liu walked around for a little bit. For some reason, his legs were also abnormally tired. He'd only taken a few steps when he found he was too tired to continue. He didn't dare push himself, so he sat down on a chair at once. When he got up again, he stumbled, but luckily Xiao Luo caught him. Liu's heart was jumping in his chest. Although he hadn't fallen, everything still felt a little off. Xiao Luo knew a bit about medicine. After checking Liu's pulse, she hurriedly asked him to sit and called for someone to fetch a doctor. With his due date approaching, the Crown Prince had brought in a doctor to live in the manor, and this doctor arrived on the scene at the same time as the imperial physician who visited every day. Together, they checked Liu's pulse, and they all agreed the baby was coming. Wang Shi sent for the midwives, and after the imperial physician's confirmation, he ran off to find the Crown Prince. Liu had only thought he'd suffered a shock. Sob, 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 was Xiao Mian, ow, that desperate to come out? And yes, we got another sob, sob, sob. Was he going to give birth right now? The Crown Prince had picked out 3 midwives with carefully verified backgrounds early on, and the delivery room was constantly prepped and ready. When the midwives received the news, they ran over and looked at Liu's stomach. Although they didn't have any experience with a man giving birth, the Crown Prince consort had told them it was roughly the same as for women. With a little more confidence, they calmly ordered the servants to boil water and prepare food. Forget house calls, just move the doctor in, right? Even though labor had started, there was still some time left before he actually had to push. The midwife asked Liu to eat as much as he could manage and to walk a bit more. It would help the birthing process. I think the person who wrote this has at least one child, because this seems very close to what I remember advice being for when my sister was giving birth, and I actually got to be there for that one. That was a special moment. I actually took my niece's first picture ever. So I felt very special. Because it was very special. It was a very special moment. She came out scowling. She was so mad. She was so mad, and I love it. Yeah. I started laughing. I was like, she's your baby to my sister because, of course, I had to mess with her. No, I love her. Oh, yeah. And I remember helping with my nephew too. I wasn't at that birth, but it definitely helped change those diapers, I can tell you that. Um He heard the Princess of Jinju recount this process several times. Now that the midwife was here, he felt a little pain in his stomach. It wasn't very sharp, more of a dull pain. After a certain point, it really started to ache, but he could still endure it. After a while, the soreness would die down. The midwife told him that everyone's birthing experience was different. Some people felt pain, others would have sore backs. When the pain became more frequent, it would be time to push. Liu was well aware of these steps. Xiao Luo came over and handed Liu a small bowl of freshly made hargao. Liu was in a good state. He could pick up the spoon and eat it himself. Faced with Xiao Luo's worried expression, Liu even managed to joke around. Previously, he'd been anxious, but now that the time came, he felt calm instead. No matter how fearful he was, he had to give birth. He might as well just go for it. The crown prince must already be on his way. He wanted to see his husband. He felt a little bit like crying. He wished for the crown prince to return, but he didn't expect him to be back so quickly. When he showed up, Liu hadn't even finished his bowl of hargao. Okay, I'm interrupting the flow, but I really want to know what hargao is. Hargao. Gao. Oh, it looks like a traditional Cantonese dim sum dish consisting of translucent thin wrapper made from wheat and tapioca starch, encasing a filling of chopped shrimp and bamboo shoots. It is known for its delicate, chewy texture and is often considered one of the four heavenly kings of Cantonese dim sum. Hargow. It looks like this. So it's dim sum. Yeah. I love dim sum. It does. When the crown prince entered, Liu was shocked and dropped the other half of his hargao. Xiao Yu! The crown prince ignored everyone else, rushed over, and swept Liu into his arms. Xiao Luo and Wang Shi stepped to the side smartly and pretended to be part of the scenery. Liu hugged him tightly. Tianxi, I'm about to give birth! To be honest, Liu had still been a little afraid. Now that the crown prince was here, though, he'd gained some courage. Don't be afraid. I'm here with you, the crown prince said gently and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Liu nodded, belatedly realizing that the crown prince, who was always as calm and steady as a mountain, had become very pale and his hands were trembling slightly. He looked even more nervous than Liu, who was the one about to go into battle. Liu was touched, but also found it funny. Your Highness, he teased. Did you ask permission to leave? I forgot. When the crown prince received the news that Liu was going into labor, he didn't even have time to tell the minister before rushing back home. Liu burst out laughing. Taking the bowl, the crown prince fed Liu a few more hargao and a piece of peach blossom pastry. Of course. It had calmed down for a while, but now Liu's stomach started to hurt again. This time, it was worse than before, and it ached more too. He couldn't speak. He bit on his lip harshly, trying to endure the pain. The Crown Prince pulled up his sleeve and brought his arm before Liu. Liu shook his head, eyes red. His husband had come to see him. He didn't feel like biting him right now. He earned some free points for rushing over without telling his boss, because he finds it very touching. After the pain passed, the midwife asked Liu to walk a little more. Liu's legs felt weak from the pain, but he had no choice. Xiao Luo came over to support him, but the Crown Prince said, "Let me." Hugging Liu, he let him lean against him, and they walked like that, very slowly. Liu's clothes were already soaked through with sweat, but he felt like he could still endure it. Liu sat down to take a break when the pain got worse, then continued his walk when it passed. This cycle continued for a while, during which the midwife came a few more times to feel Liu's stomach. Finally, she said, "We can move to the delivery room." Yeah, the boss isn't going to say anything, right? "I have to go," Liu said in a low voice. He puckered his lips with great difficulty, wanting one last victory kiss. The Crown Prince kissed him on the lips, then held his hand and said, "Let's go." Liu felt unhappy with how decisive the Crown Prince seemed. It didn't feel like he was reluctant to let him go at all. But soon he found out why. The Crown Prince didn't hand him over to the midwife. Instead, he followed him into the delivery room. That was a big no-no back in ancient time. Men did not go in the delivery room with their wives. They had to wait outside. It was, I don't know if I would use the word taboo, but it just was not done. It was a thing for the women. Like no man was allowed in the delivery room, I think. Following the midwife's instructions, he lay down on the bed, thinking that now it was time to say goodbye to the prince. But the Crown Prince had no intention of leaving. He stayed planted by the bed. The midwives bustled about around them, completely ignoring the Crown Prince, as if they had been instructed before him. Why aren't you leaving? Liu couldn't believe it. In the ancient past, delivery rooms were bloody and considered unclean. That was why. I couldn't remember why. Blood was considered unclean from down there. Few men ever entered, and especially not those of higher status. But the Crown Prince had been here for a while now. I might look that up a little more because I remember some other stuff about it, like about periods as well, that is kind of intriguing. Just like history-wise. But anyway, continuing. "Xiao Yu, don't be afraid," he repeated. "I'm here with you." Liu finally understood what the Crown Prince meant. He closed his eyes and nodded, letting his tears stream down his face. And that is a very well-earned sob, sob, sob tear moment, because he earned it. All right. He took a deep breath. Even if he had to face hell itself, he wouldn't be afraid. No matter how long the pain lasted, there would always be a pair of hands holding him tightly, giving him the courage and strength to continue on. Liu tried to follow the midwife's instructions. Before he passed out from exhaustion, he thought he heard the system, a baby crying, and a familiar voice. An unknown length of time later, he opened his eyes and found himself surrounded by light. The system appeared before him. Thinking back, he'd passed out from exhaustion. Was he in the system now? But he was still in the middle of labor. Was Xiaomia now all right? And the Crown Prince was still waiting for him. "User, please don't worry," the system told him. "You have successfully completed the Warm Cotton Jacket side quest. Your daughter has been added to your team." Was he finally done giving birth? As expected of me, he thought smugly. He seemed to have already forgotten the pain. Though Xiao Mianao had been born as a human baby and not a fish, she could still be seen from fish children status. Liu hurried to check on her and saw Xiao Luo and Madame Qing wiping a round pink baby with a thick head of hair. Liu's heart nearly melted. This was his and the Crown Prince's daughter. He had really taken care of himself properly during the pregnancy. Xiao Mianao was a newborn, but her skin wasn't wrinkly and she was very rosy. As Liu watched, the baby suddenly opened her eyes. Her round eyes and stared into the air as though looking right at Liu. It was like she knew he was looking at her. And thankfully, we have a picture. She's adorable. Right? The cuteness is too much. Liu covered his mouth and smiled. Oh, look at Wang Shi's smile at the back. Yeah. I'll show it again. There he is. Boop. Happy grandfather Wang Shi smile. Right? He looks like he's about to ascend. Liu covered his mouth and smiled. The baby was like him and also like Mu Tianxi. It was clear that this was their child. Right? Those are some proud parents. They most certainly are. He watched her for a while, unable to look away until he couldn't anymore. The system reminded Liu to accept his reward. He finally turned away reluctantly to look at something else. This time, the reward was very interesting. Increased healing and decreased pain from childbirth. What's the point of giving me this now? I've already gone through the worst of the pain. The system sure was slow. The system, who knew everything the user was thinking, said, "If the user is unhappy with this reward, do you want to cancel it?" No! It was better than nothing. Even if it were late, he'd take as little pain as he could get. Liu exited the system, but this time it was really hard to wake up. His eyelids were so heavy he couldn't open them. In the system, he was comfortable and relaxed. Outside of the system, he could feel how weak he really was. He was glad he'd accepted the reward. He was still in pain, but it was much better than giving birth had been. His throat was so dry it felt like it was on fire. Liu looked around. The room was dark, with a single candle on the desk. He could recognize this as the bedroom. Someone had cleaned him up and moved him here. He cleared his throat, wanting to call for someone, when someone called out to him first. Xiao Yu. Liu couldn't have been more familiar with that hoarse voice. He was surprised and delighted all at once. It was dark in the room, so he hadn't noticed Mu Tianxi at first and thought he was alone. But the other man had never left his side. He'd been here the whole time, waiting for him to wake up. Xiao Yu. Mu Tianxi wouldn't let him get up. He fed him a cup of warm tea, then called the imperial physicians in to take Liu's pulse. The physicians had already checked Liu over once while he was unconscious. The Crown Prince ordered them to check again, and they confirmed that the Crown Prince consort was fine. Liu stared at the open doorway. What about Xiao Mianao? He'd already seen his daughter in the system, but he'd never held her. Mu Tianxi chuckled. They're cleaning her up. Just wait a moment. Soon, Wang Shi brought over a baby swaddled in pink. The Crown Prince accepted her, then brought the baby over to Liu. Liu touched his daughter's hand, staring at her rosy cheeks. She really did look exactly the same as she had in the system. Fish Dad kissed his daughter's face, satisfied. Liu was still exhausted. Staying awake had taken a lot of his energy, and he soon fell back asleep. Wu Tianxi covered his consort and daughter up with the blanket and kissed both on their foreheads. Footsteps could be heard outside. The children were here. "Dad! Dad!" they called out. They'd been studying in the Imperial study room during the day. After they found out Liu was about to give birth, the Emperor kept them in Qianqing Palace for a few extra hours. He'd only let them return home just now in case the Crown Prince and his consort were busy. "Shh." Wu Tianxi stopped the children quietly. "Daddy is tired. Don't wake him." The children nodded, promising not to be loud, and the Crown Prince let them in. Da Bao, Air Bao, San Bao, and Si Bao tiptoed over to surround their fish dad. First, they looked at their sister. She really was so small, even smaller than the Mei Mei at their uncle's house. Then they looked at Fish Dad, who was deeply asleep. "We'll wait for Dad and Mei Mei," the children said happily. The Crown Prince had a daughter. When they heard the news, many of the court officials thought it was unfortunate. If it had been a son, it would have been the first little royal grandson after he'd become the Crown Prince, which would have been very meaningful. A son surely would have been doted on by the Emperor and Crown Prince, but since it was a daughter, it was hard to say. They clearly don't know the Crown Prince. But that's okay. We know how it's going to go. Liu also heard similar rumors, but he didn't pay them any mind. People in the ancient times were sexist, but as long as he wasn't, it would be all fine. Boy or girl, both were good. Plus, Xiaomian Ao was very meaningful to them. She was their only daughter. As for the Crown Prince himself, Liu often saw him holding Xiaomian Ao, staring at her for a long time, unwilling to let go. Because Liu needed to recover, the Crown Prince took care of everything for Xiaomian Ao. How could anyone think for a second that he didn't adore her? If he could have wrapped her up in bubble wrap, he'd still worry about her getting bruises. The Crown Prince's affection for his daughter didn't stop there. When he first found out Liu was pregnant with a daughter, he'd prepared many names. After she was born, though, he didn't think any of them were suitable. He'd been struggling for a few days now, but he still couldn't make a decision. So you remember, like, the baby names. So, not their official names, but nicknames are what they use while growing up. Even the decisive Crown Prince could suffer from indecision, it seemed. In the end, Liu picked out the characters Qiangshu from a thick stack of names. So, Qiangshu meaning fine jade and snow. Two days after Xiaomian Ao was born, her rosy skin became pale, as glossy as jade. This ethereal name was perfect for her. I feel like some court official is going to make an unfortunate remark someday and get verbally flayed for it. Oh, absolutely. Someone's going to be verbally eviscerated by Prince Jing or Liu one day for being like, "How unfortunate you had a daughter." And they're like, "Oh, you silly bitch. Let me tell you what's up and how very, very wrong you are." Now that they'd figured out her name... Wait, I thought they were going to name her Xiaomian Ao. Or is that her nickname? Now that they figured out her name, they needed a nickname. Liu had made a decision back when he was incubating the fish roe. He was going to continue what he had started with Da Bao, Air Bao, San Bao, and Si Bao. Xiaomian Ao was number 5, so she should rightfully be Wu Bao. But Liu wanted to show off his beautiful daughter. Taking her name into consideration, he decided to call her Shu Bao. Crown Prince read it out loud a few times. He quite liked it. Dabao and the others quickly followed suit, clapping their hands. You'll be older brothers from now on, Fish Dad instructed his sons. So you have to take care of Shubao, understood? The children all nodded, each bringing out their favorite toys to give to Shubao. Liu burst out laughing. It would be a long time before their sister could play with these toys. That's still a really sweet thing that they did, because especially children that young sharing their favorite toy, that's love. That's love right there. When he found out that the Crown Prince consort had given birth to a daughter, the Emperor also showered them in gifts. Because Shu Bao was a newborn, she couldn't go outside, so the Emperor dressed in common clothing and made a trip to the Crown Prince Manor especially to see his granddaughter. As far as Liu could remember, he'd never done that before. The Emperor wasn't expecting at all to see something like the confession that was engraved into the wall, and he shot the Crown Prince a derisive glance. Finding out that the entire manor had been turned into a giant fish tank came as much less of a shock in comparison. Wouldn't he know about that? Like, it was pretty talked about, I thought. The Crown Prince brought Shu Bao out for the Emperor to see. As soon as he held her, he didn't want to let go. Shu Bao wasn't shy either. She stared curiously at the Emperor with her dark, round eyes. The Emperor was so happy he gifted Shu Bao a piece of warm jade Empress Xiao Huai used to wear. Shu Bao was an infant, so she often had to be fed and changed. The Emperor personally handed Shu Bao to Madame Qin, reminded her to be careful. Madame Qin was nearly scared witless. Staring at his daughter, who was like the moon being held up by a sky full of stars, Liu thought of those rumors. Those people outside had no idea. Even he's saying it, he's like, oh, yeah, sure. Believe what you want to believe. Yeah, that's pretty sweet. The Emperor was never shy when it came to his grandchildren. He'd given titles to Liu and the Crown Prince's sons, and Cheng and Shizi and the Princess of Jinju's daughter was given the title of Jun Shu. Now it was this granddaughter's turn. The daughter of a crown prince should have the title of Jun Shu, but if he left it at that, the Emperor thought, that would put her on the same level as Qinghe Jun Shu. Qinghe Jun Shu was technically a subject. How could they hold the same title? Disregarding all principles, the Emperor decided to make Shu Bao a princess and give her a title. The Crown Prince and his consort had picked Shu Bao's name and nickname, but the Emperor refused to lose to them and picked out Shu Bao's title. Usually, princesses were given titles upon marriage, but the Emperor had picked out one for the little princess ahead of time. He'd spent a long time thinking about it. The Crown Prince's daughter, Qiang Shu, was given the title of Princess Wen Huai, meaning gentle and intelligent or wise. And I see how he included the Huai, just like the Emperor Xiao Huai. I noticed that right there. Staring at their swaddled daughter, Liu and the Crown Prince both simultaneously felt the sadness that Yi Qinghuan had mentioned when considering their daughter's future wedding. Her title included the same Huai as Empress Xiao Huai's title. This both represented the wisdom the Emperor wanted his little granddaughter to embody, as well as a nod to his beloved Empress. Called it. Liu's original plan had been to dote on his daughter as if she were a princess, but when he heard she'd officially become a princess already, he was a little speechless. But even if the Emperor hadn't given her that title, he supposed it would have been hers anyway once her father ascended to the throne. He'd thought Dabao was a real coy before, but this little princess's luck could give Dabao a run for his money. The officials fought against the Emperor's decision at court the next morning. Shu Bao was a girl and the Crown Prince's daughter, but the Emperor refused to budge, so that was how things worked out. Some tried to convince the Crown Prince to refuse on his daughter's behalf, but he ignored them. This was what the Emperor wanted to do, and Xiao Yu's daughter definitely deserved to hold the title of princess. The people who'd originally wanted to make fun of the crown prince consort for giving birth to a daughter suddenly realized he was still being showered with love anyway. At Xue Bao's 1-month celebration, the crown prince practically invited half the city. Even the emperor came, and after the celebration, no one dared to suggest the little princess wasn't doted on. Although the birthing process had been terribly painful, Liu healed very quickly with the benefit of the system. The midwife predicted it'd take him about a month to recover, but it only took Liu a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, he was still forced to suffer through postpartum confinement, so I think that's 30 days. In ancient times, people believed that in the first month after birth, one had to avoid the wind and cold as well as bathing. In the month after giving birth to little Xue Bao, swimming and bath time, both things he didn't care for much before, became luxuries he could only dream about. He'd recovered long ago, but the crown prince, ever careful, wanted him to rest for a whole month. How could he survive not touching water for a whole month? And Liu still had to turn back into a fish once a day. But the crown prince was better at keeping track of the time than he was. Liu wanted to sneak into the water for a bit when he transformed, but the crown prince mercilessly blocked any chance of that. He confiscated all his fish tanks and crystal bottles, only leaving him a wet cloth. After flopping around on the cloth, he'd have to return to human form. As time went on, Liu thought he'd turned into a filthy loach. More than once, he complained about how gross he felt. After consulting the midwife and imperial physician, the crown prince started wiping Liu's face with a warm cloth, but it was barely any use. It wasn't getting to the root of the problem. To try and keep him calm, the crown prince wiped his entire body down himself. Liu resisted a few times before just giving in. The crown prince had seen him at his worst anyway. The prince still had his bite marks on the back of his hand. So what if he helped him get through the month? Prince Jing is hilariously overprotective, yeah. I kind of wonder at the theory about the not bathing just because, like, I feel almost that would be counterproductive to staying healthy. I'm kind of curious about it, honestly. Like, I've heard of the confinement period. I just didn't realize, like, it was you couldn't bathe at all. But I don't know. It's intriguing. I might look into that more. On the day that he was finally free, Liu dragged the crown prince off to take a 4-hour bath with him. After his wash, the loach turned back into a squeaky clean man. Yeah, it would be the 30-day, I call it the 1-month confinement. So after birth, no one would see, like, only close family, and even like that wouldn't see the baby other than the parents for like a month, partially due to fear of sickness, so like the rain and the wind thing, the cold and wind, but also the mother wouldn't go out for a month after giving birth. I didn't realize the no bathing thing, but I knew about the confinement. At Xue Bao's 1-month celebration, Liu and the crown prince wore matching robes in dark red brocade. I have heard of cases where it still happens. I don't know about the bathing thing, though. I'm not surprised it still happens. You can? Okay. I don't know if in the United States I don't know how much leave people can take. I think it depends on the jobs. Maybe if it's cultural, it might be more more available to be approved. I don't know. I'm interested, so I'll probably look into that. If you know more, I'd love to hear it, Chichikiki. Da Bao, Air Bao, San Bao, and Si Bao all wore little golden robes embroidered with fishes and the word luck, and Xue Bao, a little dress dotted with red plum blossoms. There were 2 tiny pigtails atop her head, tied with ribbons that matched her dress. She looked like a little fairy. Okay. still happens in China. Interesting. Now that the crown prince had a daughter, the entire Cheng'an family came to congratulate him. When the old Duke of Cheng'an, Yixian, saw his great-granddaughter, his steps became lighter. After he held her, he couldn't stop smiling. He took out a somewhat old necklace, placing it around Shu Bao's neck. Really? That's pretty cool. Huh. Shu Bao didn't understand anything. She accidentally tugged on Yixian's beard, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he burst out laughing. The princess of Jinju and Yi Qinghuan brought their daughter too. When they saw Shu Bao, they told Liu he was doing a great job taking care of her. Qinghe Junshu was just starting to walk. She toddled over to the younger girl and kissed her on the cheek. Da Bao and the others were particularly naughty, picking all the flowers in the garden. They picked the prettiest flowers to make into flower crowns and put one on each of the girls' heads. I wouldn't call that naughty. I call that sweet. Liu desperately wished he had a camera so he could save this heartwarming moment. A little later, though, when he was changing back in his room, he saw an unfinished painting on the desk. The painting was of the two families meeting, a group of cute children surrounding two little girls wearing flower crowns. They all had rosy cheeks, smiling like flowers. The painting was unfinished, but it was clearly the crown prince's work. The prince's painting skills were excellent. No matter whether his subjects were people or inanimate objects, they all looked very real. Liu loved this painting dearly and was thinking of asking his husband if he could have it when he noticed the words in the corner, for Xiao Yu. So, it had been for him all along. Liu was thrilled. He'd accidentally discovered the crown prince's gift for him, so he'd just have to pretend he hadn't seen anything. He glanced around. Other than the painting on the table, there was also that painting of their family of 6 on the wall. No. Now it was a family of 7. Liu realized suddenly that a little koi fish dotted with red had appeared among the group of fish. It was very similar to what Shu Bao had worn today. Clearly, that was the crown prince's work as well. Although the crown prince and Shu Bao weren't fish, they were still here with everyone else as fish. Liu smiled at the two paintings, lost in happiness. His reverie was interrupted when Wang Shi called out to him from outside, saying the Marquise of Dingbei had brought a gift for him. Wang Shi's words sounded a little strange. There had been plenty of gifts given at the celebration, but nobody had mentioned who each gift had come from before. Besides, the Marquise of Dingbei... Liu was already the crown prince consort, but he couldn't keep track of all the nobility in the capital. The crown prince never forced him to remember either. Wang Shi said the gift bearer had been from the Marquise of Dingbei's household, but he couldn't remember who that was. Liu put the painting back and went to see Wang Shi, who was waiting with a silk handkerchief in hand. When he saw Liu unwrapping it, revealing a small, very delicate silver bracelet intended to protect the wearer. When Wang Shi received the gift, he'd also been confused, but he had also been very careful, wiping the bracelet inside and out many times. He'd even kept it on himself for a while, and only came to find Liu once he was certain there was no problem with it whatsoever. Spotting the word Liang on the handkerchief, Liu realized who had sent it. No wonder he'd thought the Marquise of Dingbei sounded familiar. Those were the in-laws of the late 6th Prince Mu Tianxiao. Liu had once helped Mu Tianxiao's wife, Lady Liang. After he held her hostage, Lady Liang lost any faith she still had in her husband, and she'd lost the child in her belly too. After that, she moved back in with her family. When Mu Tianxiao was working with Princess Lengjia, he'd never once spared a thought for his wife. This was fortunate, though, as it meant that when the emperor was clearing the palace of Lulan forces, the Marquise of Dongbei, who had close ties with Mu Tianxiao, wasn't affected. Lady Liang hadn't managed to divorce Mu Tianxiao before his death, and so she had become a widow. She lived in the countryside and never left the house. When she heard the crown prince consort had given birth to a daughter, and that the daughter was now 1 month old, she wanted to give a gift to show her gratitude. But since she was still in mourning, it was inappropriate for her to appear at a celebration, as it might be inauspicious, so this was the only way she could show her thanks. Her child had been a daughter too, but she hadn't been able to keep her. She hoped the crown prince consort's child would always be safe. Liu put Lady Liang's gift away carefully. When he thought about her situation, he was very sympathetic. When Mu Tianxiao was alive, he barely cared for Lady Liang. Now that he was dead, she still had to mourn for him. Apparently, Lady Liang was even younger than he was, and she had to spend the rest of her days as a widow? Liu was a modern person. He thought living as a widow seemed like a rather cruel fate. Was there any way he could help Lady Liang escape the shadow of Mu Tianxiao? I think we have like one more chapter left for tonight. Let me see real quick. 2. We have 2. Okay. Chapter 148. Married for 100 Lives. Liu asked Madame Qin about the life of a widow. In the current dynasty, women didn't remarry after their husbands died, as remaining a widow was seen as virtuous. Although it wasn't required by law, the court rewarded women who didn't remarry. There were, of course, those who remarried anyway, but those women were often looked down on and judged, shunned by those around them. Lady Liang's situation was even more complicated and difficult. Ordinary women who didn't care about their reputations could remarry, but that wasn't a possibility for Lady Liang. Even though the sixth prince had been written out of the royal family, Lady Liang was still considered part of the royal family. The emperor would never allow the previous consort of a prince to remarry. Besides, Lady Liang's marriage to Mu Tianxiao had been ordered by the emperor. If she tried to remarry, it could be seen as going against the emperor's orders. The emperor hated Mu Tianxiao, and he'd never checked on Lady Liang either. Though the Marquise of Dingbei was Lady Liang's family, if she lived there long term, people would start talking. So in order not to drag down her parents, Lady Liang moved to the countryside. Even so, she was still glared at whenever she left the house. "Do you want to find her a new marriage?" Madame Qin asked, smiling. One didn't usually ask after widows without a reason. Madame Qin had an older sister who had been married before. Because her husband died of illness, she was well aware of how much widows suffered. Later, she remarried, despite the disapproval of everyone around her. In her own words, being a widow was a fate worse than death. It was a good thing her sister had remarried. She was now doing well away from the capital and often came to visit Madame Qin. Because of her sister's experience, Madame Qin supported the idea of Lady Liang remarrying. She thought Liu wanted to find Lady Liang a new husband. Liu froze. What remarriage? What? If Lady Liang and Mu Tianxiao had had a good relationship and Lady Liang wanted to remain a widow for his sake, that would have been none of Liu's business. But it was clear that Lady Liang couldn't have been more disappointed in Mu Tianxiao. She only remained a widow because she was being held hostage by social etiquette. There were plenty of fish in the sea. Yep. Why did a perfectly good person have to remain loyal to this long-dead one? When a husband lost his wife, nobody expected those men to remain widowers. Everyone thought men needed to be taken care of. Men remarrying was reasonable, but a woman remarrying would be judged for her whole life. Talk about double standards. But Liu had never thought about Lady Liang remarrying. Mu Tianxiao was dead, so she no longer had any ties to him. She should live the kind of life she wanted. Liu shook his head. I'm not going to try to be a matchmaker. He just wanted Lady Liang to escape Mu Tianxiao's shadow. If she wanted to remarry, she could. If she wanted to live a quiet, peaceful life, she could do that too. Liu wanted to help Lady Liang, but he wasn't quite sure how exactly to go about it. If he went to ask the Crown Prince for help, though, he'd definitely think of something for him. After all, the two of them were deeply in love. Liu was unreasonably confident. When Liu shared his thoughts with Madame Qin, she sighed. Lady Liang would be very lucky to receive your help. But I don't know if she will accept. A widow completely cutting ties with her husband's family was almost unheard of. It required a great deal of bravery to withstand the insults. When Madame Qin's sister first remarried, her neighbors and relatives had pointed their fingers at her and accused her of not being a virtuous woman. After her second marriage, she left her hometown with her husband, and that was how she was able to face her new life with ease. Liu hadn't even considered this. Might Lady Liang reject his help? He decided to send Madame Qin to find out how Lady Liang felt. The response he received was that Lady Liang didn't want to change anything about her current situation. When asked why, she said, "People's words are to be feared." As Mu Tianxiao's wife, she could continue to live in peace, even if she was alone. As herself, she would have to face insults and judgment from all sides. It wasn't something that could be fixed by just changing someone's identity. An entire group of people had to change. All the arrangements Liu had wanted to make for Lady Liang went down the drain. There was no need to discuss it with the Crown Prince then. No, he still had to go. Perhaps Lady Liang didn't need the help, but that didn't mean other women wouldn't. This was a societal issue, not a personal one. If you could change one tiny thing in this world, even if it was just a bit more empathy for widows, that was still worth something. Liu ran off to look for the Crown Prince, but he couldn't find him anywhere. As he approached, he found a group of guards surrounding the prince's study. When Liu asked them what was going on, they told him that apparently the Crown Prince was discussing something top secret with Yishizi. Liu was about to leave, but the guard said the Crown Prince had given orders to not let anyone in except the consort. What did that mean? Did that mean he could go inside without a problem? Since the Crown Prince didn't want him to stay out, there was no reason for Liu to be overly cautious in his own home. Oh, I just had to sneeze and then it stopped. Oh, that's the worst. Oh. Oh, I hate that when it does that. Oh. That's the worst. Since the Crown Prince didn't want him to stay out, there was no reason for Liu to be overly cautious in his own home. After walking a few steps into the study, he heard Yi Qinghuan's voice. "Jianxi, answer me," he was saying seriously. "Is he a human or a Yao?" Yeah, and it just stays in the nose and feels weird. It does. Liu wasn't really a Yao, but he was very sensitive to people calling him that. It was his own fault for pretending to be a carp spirit. As soon as Yi Qinghuan mentioned Yao, Liu automatically assumed it was about him. Was his cover that easily blown? First Chu Yanyu and now Yi Qinghuan? Chu Yanyu had suspected him because a servant had spotted him transforming. What had tipped Yi Qinghuan off? Liu was completely certain he'd never transformed in front of him before. He held his breath and continued listening. Mu Tianxi trusted Yi Qinghuan. He didn't answer him at once, but after a brief moment of thought, he said, "Why do you ask?" "That day, when he suddenly appeared in the lotus pond and handed the tiger talisman to me, he wouldn't leave the water no matter what, and wouldn't let anyone else near him," Yi Qinghuan replied. "It was very strange. Later, when I asked the guards, not a single person had seen him enter the manor." Mu Tianxi listened without moving a single muscle in his face. The tiger talisman was top secret, and there were only a few people who knew about it. But everyone knew that the crown prince consort had run out of the palace for help. Yeah, Yu Shizi finally catching on, and you showed up in his pond. Not his smartest, smart, but not for keeping his secret. The emperor had seen the fish take away the tiger talisman with his own eyes. The crown prince had led the emperor to believe that the fish had handed the talisman over to his consort, and his consort had figured out a way to bring the troops to save them. This way, the story matched up with the rumors circulating outside. The emperor never suspected a thing. In reality, only the crown prince and Liu knew that there had never been any relay in the middle. It was a fish. It was Fish Liu who had delivered the talisman. Because the whole Princess Langya incident had been dealt with so smoothly, the crown prince had never given it too much thought. But now that Yi Qinghuan was bringing up suspicions, it was clear he had been negligent. Just a handful of questions wasn't close to enough to make him admit to anything, though. He raised an eyebrow. "And what does that prove?" "Nothing," said Yi Qinghuan. "It's possible Cao Zi could have snuck in while the guards weren't paying attention. However, a civilian did request an audience with the House of Chang'an, though, and told us that they ran into a monster that was fish on top and human on the bottom, which escaped into the river outside the manor. I didn't believe it at first, of course. I told them to not speak nonsense. But later, I found out that the river is connected to the lotus pond." "Holy shit, Liu, he even connected those dots?" While he was delivering the talisman, the complicated route he took had forced him to transform several times. When he arrived at the House of Chang'an, he had been in merman form. He kept his tail hidden in the water and told Yi Qinghuan not to approach him. Yi Qinghuan had never said anything after the fact, so Liu thought it was fine. He didn't expect Yi Shizi to start suspecting him. And the person who saw him as a manmer saw he'd been short on time and he had no choice. It was lucky that man ended up going to Yi Qinghuan. He had been in a rush to save his husband. He completely forgot he'd been seen. Alright, heading another. And that fell off. Okay. The crown prince was deep in thought, his brow furrowed. He didn't say anything else. "To be honest, none of this proves anything," Yi Qinghuan said hesitantly. "It's just, I heard about noble Lady Chu slandering the crown prince consort, saying he was your pet fish. That's when I remembered. That day when he was hiding in the water, there was something silvery at the bottom of the pond. I didn't think much of it, but after hearing noble Lady Chu's absurd claims, I thought it must have been a fishtail. But Tianxi, no matter what, I wanted to come ask you first." Yi Qinghuan had thought it over for some time, trying to find any flaws in his logic, but really, he'd already reached a conclusion. He waited until now because he'd finally made up his mind to ask the crown prince for the truth. Whether it was noble Lady Chu or noble Lady Wang, all that mattered was that Yi Qinghuan was firmly loyal to the crown prince, so who cared about whatever his name was, noble Lady Chu, noble Lady Wang? All that mattered was the prince's safety. No matter if Liu was human or something else, he was certain that Liu had no ill intentions toward the crown prince or his family. When he'd mulled over these recent events, that truth had felt absolutely clear to him. Liu, meanwhile, felt so awkward he could have carved a fish tank into the ground to jump into, but he was afraid to come face to face with Yi Qinghuan. He'd really managed to work it out. What if Yi Shizi wanted him to answer? What would he say? It It was easy to simply refuse to admit it, but Yi Qinghuan had already seen his tail. If he lied, wouldn't that clear Yi Qinghuan's suspicions? That wasn't solving the problem, that was just hiding his head in the sand. Liu didn't want to harm his friends, and he didn't want the Crown Prince to harm his friends for his sake either. Crown Prince wasn't sure what to do. If you knew the truth, what would you do? He asked. Nothing, Yi Qinghuan said. He saved the Emperor. He saved you, and he saved me too. He even cured your muteness and birthed your children. I wouldn't tell anyone, not even the princess. I just want to know the truth. I don't want to do anything to him. If he really had wanted to do something, he wouldn't have waited this long to see the Crown Prince in private. Liu couldn't have been more moved. Nice one, Yi Qinghuan, as expected of his cousin-in-law. Thinking back to the day he delivered the tiger talisman, when Prince Li didn't believe him, it had been Yi Qinghuan who helped him. Even if he'd suspected something, Yi Qinghuan had always been taken. Even if he'd suspected something, Yi Qinghuan had always been taking care of him. Mu Tianxi observed Yi Qinghuan. He knew Yi Qinghuan very well, and he could tell he was serious and definitely not lying. There was no need to deceive him any further, so the Crown Prince nodded. Yes, he said. It's as you suspect. So, he really is? You said, Shizzy. Look, I just want to know if he's a Yao. I know he's not evil. I agree, Chuckle. Yes. Even though he'd thought he was prepared, Yi Qinghuan's jaw still dropped. No wonder Liu could give birth and was able to help the Crown Prince with so much. He was a Yao! And also, are you cool with that, Tianchi? Okay, good chat. Let's us never speak this again. I love that the fact that he was like, no wonder he could give birth. And he helps so much with the Crown Prince. He's a Yao! That's why I kept losing to that fish. There really were Yao in this world. Oh, why is he here with you? He stuttered. Yushizi feared ghosts and gods alike, as well as Yao. He couldn't figure out why a great Yao would want to marry a plain old human. Because he and I are fated, the Crown Prince said calmly. We'll be married for 100 lives. This is just the first. Liu had assumed the Crown Prince would mention his tribulation, but he didn't. The Crown Prince thought that was Xiao Yu's secret, and he refused to reveal it no matter what. He'd rather make up a story instead. Liu felt like he'd discovered something. The Crown Prince wasn't just bullshitting. This was another form of PDA. Yishizi, having suffered another bout of PDA, slapped his thigh in realization. That's why you have a thing for fish, right? I understand. Wait, what? What do you understand? Liu was shocked. My husband doesn't have any special interests like that. Dude, he saw your husband, running out of your bridal chamber carrying a fish. Half naked. He's right in having some assumptions, let's be real. Not that you remember that. But let's be fair, he's taking the fact that your husband had a fish on his wedding night pretty well. Actually, he took that less well than the fact that you're a Yao, let's be real. Which, yeah. He's a good guy. Let's just put it at that. Chapter 149, Fishy Survey. With the look Yi Qinghuan had on his face, who could say what he was imagining? But since he's that, why doesn't he just use his powers to do things? There were some things Yi Qinghuan hadn't worked out yet. Xiao Yu has his own principles, said the Crown Prince sternly. You can't force him to do anything. Yi Qinghuan nodded. As long as Li Yu was on the Crown Prince's side and wouldn't harm him. But he had one more very important question. Then Da Bao and the others and Shu Bao, are they all... No, responded the Crown Prince. Shu Bao was born as a human. The Crown Prince had stayed by Liu in the delivery room partially because he was afraid of potential accidents. He had decided long ago that he would protect Xiao Yu at any cost. If anything happened, there were a lot of people who would have to be dealt with immediately. His daughter definitely wasn't a Yao. As for his sons, though they were born as fish, they were all human now, and they couldn't transform. The Crown Prince didn't want to complicate matters, so he just said that they weren't. Xiao Yu had once told him that their 4 sons would have to wait until they were 7 to turn into fish again. That was still a long ways off. If it came to it, they could even explain it to their Yi Shushu themselves. Really? You're going to push that on the kids? To be like, by the way, Yi Shushu, we can turn into fish, just like Daddy. Yi Qinghuan sighed in relief, having apparently accepted this answer. Then how should I interact with him? Is there anything I shouldn't do? Liu was a fish Yao. That was an exhilarating thought on its own. He hadn't known before. He'd just thought that Liu had a good personality. Now that he knew, he thought Yao with such personalities must be hard to come by. No! Even if there was, I wouldn't tell you. Then would he fear Xiang Fei? Yi Qinghuan figured if Liu was afraid of him, he'd have to keep his beloved canine on a leash from now on. The Crown Prince looked at him with an expression that said, Are you stupid? Yi Qinghuan smacked his own forehead. Right! How could I forget? He used to play with Xiang Fei. He probably is fine. Obviously. He smiled. Xiang Fei had long since stopped treating him as a stranger. He'd probably caught on way before his master had. Yi Qinghuan wasn't very knowledgeable and had a lot of questions. Once he started, he didn't stop. The Crown Prince was getting tired. He was ready to throw him out of the manor. Okay, I'll leave. Don't throw me out. Yi Qinghuan smiled as he asked for mercy. Now that I know everything, I promise you I won't tell anyone else. But the Crown Prince obviously already knew Yi Shizi was reliable, otherwise he wouldn't have revealed any of this to him. Yi Qinghuan bade his goodbyes and was just about to leave when the Crown Prince called out to him, Wait! Yi Qinghuan looked back. Remember, the Crown Prince said in a serious tone that Yi Qinghuan had never heard before. He and I are one. Protecting him is the same as protecting me. Yes, Your Highness. Yi Qinghuan suddenly understood the Crown Prince's intentions, so he also became more serious than he'd ever been. He stopped smiling and clasped his hands together in a solemn bow. Now that he knew the truth, he no longer felt so conflicted. Recently, he'd been trying to suppress what he was feeling, and he couldn't let his wife or parents find out what was weighing on him, so this was quite a relief. Yi Qinghuan walked out humming a little tune. When he looked up, he spotted Liu, who was standing outside. He couldn't help the shiver that ran up his spine. Things were different now. Now he knew that Liu was a Yao. If he was expected to treat him exactly the same as before, that still felt a bit too hard. Yi Qinghuan! Liu knew he was struggling and deliberately waved to him. Yi Qinghuan's hands never even shook when he was killing the traitorous Lulan soldiers, but right now his face was bright red and he greeted Liu weakly before running off, sticking close to the wall. Of course, Yi Shizi definitely wasn't afraid. He just had some important business to go handle, such as figuring out a new place for the civilian who had seen a Myanmar. Well, at least he's not just killing him. Liu was just teasing Yi Shizi. He didn't have any ulterior motives. As soon as Yi Qinghuan left, he walked into the study. Tianqi, I'm here, Liu said, smiling. When he saw him, the seriousness on the Crown Prince's face melted away, leaving only gentle love. He didn't seem surprised that this fish would come to the study. Tianqi, I heard the conversation between you and Yi Qinghuan just now, said Liu. The prince held his hand. I'm sorry. Yi Qinghuan had already noticed. I couldn't hide it anymore. Liu shook his head. That's nothing. Yi Shizi is family. But what was that you told him about some kind of fate of 100 lifetimes? Liu wanted to ask what the Crown Prince had been thinking, but the prince glanced at him shyly. Was that not okay? The desolation in his eyes struck Liu right in the heart. "It's okay," he said loudly, hurrying to reassure him. Crown Prince smiled. "Then that's that." Telling Yi Qinghuan a small white lie was nothing. Although they already had 4 sons and a daughter, the Crown Prince still had a lingering fear that the carp spirit would abandon him. If they really had an agreement of 100 lifetimes, he wouldn't have to worry about this fish leaving. Liu, completely besotted with his husband, didn't notice that he'd been tricked. Alone together as usual, there was no separating the two of them. As he sat on his husband's lap in a thoroughly improper fashion, Liu remembered the important matters. "Tianqi, can I help women who have been widowed? If they want a new life, can I support them?" He only had a vague plan. Since he didn't know what these women wanted, he didn't know how exactly to set things up, but he hoped he could provide them somewhere to go to ask for help. He wanted to show everyone his stance on the situation, that there was someone in the world who supported widows making a new start. The Crown Prince immediately knew who he was thinking about. "You want to help Lady Liang," he said after a moment's pondering. "But her marriage was ordered by the Emperor. It won't be easy." "I know. She doesn't seem to want my help either. I want to help other women who are in her situation." Liu actually wanted to start an organization similar to a women's federation. If he could provide help to women like that, he would maintain it for as long as they wanted it. Of course, that included Lady Liang too. Originally, he'd been planning to use both emotion and logic to convince the Crown Prince so he could accept his worldview, but as the words arrived in his mouth, he changed his mind. Crown Prince had told Yi Qinghuan he is me. That was how important that he was to the prince. The thought distracted Liu for a while. He was curious how far the Crown Prince was willing to go for him. Everyone said playing cute and whining was the best way to test how caring your husband was. He'd just whine a little bit to see. He grasped the Crown Prince's arm, shaking it tenaciously. "Tianqi, I just want to help them. Is that all right?" Mu Tianqi paused. "Yes," he chuckled. "That's it?" "Then can I tell you why I want to help them?" Liu tried. "Yes." Liu was delighted. He immediately listed out everything that was unfair about the treatment of women in ancient time. If he wanted to change this era, it would be best if he could get the people to sympathize with women. It might be very difficult. After all, many people would not be able to relate to this experience. But lots of people had a sister or a daughter, just as Xue Bei was his and the Crown Prince's daughter. If they were willing to help these women, perhaps one day it would help a woman in their lives. "It makes sense," said the Crown Prince. "What do you want to do?" The Crown Prince had a feeling that this wasn't going to be easy. If he wanted to hand out money or food, after all, there would have been no need to discuss it with him beforehand. The Crown Prince consort could do just that with his own hands. Liu fluttered his lashes and didn't answer. "Your Highness, let's do a public opinion survey." "What's that?" The Crown Prince had never heard of such a thing. "It's just watch." Liu thought up a few questions, turned them into paper forms, and ordered the servants to copy them. These were surveys, he said. He got ready to hand them out. Before he left, he laid down some rules. Anyone who filled out the survey seriously could get 1 copper coin as a reward, but each person was limited to 1 survey. This was basically the same as handing out free money. Liu asked Wang Shi to spread the news ahead of time. A line formed immediately outside. There were plenty of people who lamented that they were missing out because they couldn't write. Liu asked Wang Shi to pass along the word that it didn't matter if they couldn't write. The servants of the Crown Prince Manor would be available to read the questions out loud, and they could answer them verbally. The responses would be recorded, and they could still receive the money. With that, the line grew longer and longer. Wang Shi soon ran out of surveys and had to add several dozen more copies to make sure everyone received one. There were plenty of scholars among the respondents. When they read the survey, they all shook their heads. What kind of nonsense was this? For example, what is your opinion on a widowed woman remarrying? Did that even need to be answered? After they'd studied for all these years, how could they not understand the concept of shame? Many people didn't even hesitate before answering the first question. The next question, however. Imagine if your relative unfortunately lost her husband. Please re-answer the first question. If everyone is able to easily answer the first question, the second question felt a lot more difficult. One could only receive money if they answered the survey seriously. Plenty of people thought it over carefully. What if it was a woman from their own family? Like that, Liu received the people's thoughts and opinions in exchange for a little money. Liu went through the surveys. Out of the 200 or so people who participated, less than 10% were firmly opposed for both questions. The number of people who answered positively in both questions was also less than 10%. When it came to their own relatives, the rest of the people's attitudes changed from strongly opposed to acceptable between the first and second questions. As he expected, it was easy to stand on a moral high ground when the situation didn't involve you. The respondents clearly all knew that a widow's life wasn't easy. If it was a woman close to them, they wouldn't judge her so harshly. Once he'd organized the results, Liu handed them to the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince skimmed through it. Xiao Yu wanted to plead for the people, he said approvingly. That's right, Liu answered. He could only help a few people by himself, but if he could speak to the emperor and enact change from top down, it would help more than just a few people. Tianxi, will you help me? Liu asked. The Crown Prince's response was firm. Yes. Because I am you? Liu asked, half jokingly, half emotional. So the fish had heard. The Crown Prince smiled. Because I will give you everything you ask for. Tianxi, he suddenly remembered the main quest that had gone quiet after Princess Langya's revolt. What did it mean to share the country? The Crown Prince said he would give him everything he wanted. Did that mean he should push forward bravely? Apart from helping these women, there's something else I want. The Crown Prince had given him too much love. Liu pressed on bravely. Tianxi, this is my last tribulation. If one day you ascend to that spot and I wanted your country, what would you do? And that is where we're going to end tonight, but we will be finishing the entire story on Thursday. We're on to our last live stream for the disabled tyrant and his beloved pet fish. I had to end it on a cliffhanger. Come on, it's the second to last one. But yeah, we're almost done with this. Right? Yeah, we really are almost done. Look at that. That's it. That's all there's left. Right? And I will tell you, there are some kind of extra parts. So we do get a little bit of extras. They're not spicy, but they're very cute. But yeah, I'm super excited. Right? I'm glad you liked it, Truffle. No, it's been such fun reading this whole series. And I agree, I'm a little sad to see it go, but it'll always be up. And we had such a great time doing this. So I know we're going to have a great time on the next one. Okay. I hope you enjoy looking at the moon truffle. I might go take a look at it too. I think it cleared up, and it really is a great story. It's one of my absolute favorites. The next book is Thousand Autumns. So we go from absolutely sweet, healthy, perfect relationship to toxic. Well, not toxic, but kind of an asshole. He's a charismatic asshole, but I actually like Yan Yoshi, right? ever slappable Yan Wuxi. I enjoy it. I also like Thousand Autumns. Even though Yan Wuxi is right, I can't help but like him either. Right. So we will actually start that one on Tuesday, but we'll finish this one first. It kind of worked out perfectly. I didn't plan it like that. It's a red flag, but Shen Chao is blind. Yeah, he was. No, I'll have the first link to it probably up by the end of tonight. But yeah, it's crazy that we're ending this. But it's been so much fun. All right. I will say goodnight to all of you and hope that everyone who listens later enjoyed, and to look forward to our last stream of Disabled Tyrant Beloved Pet Fish this Thursday. Good night.